F1 is all about creating the right car with the right setup and introducing the right upgrades. Red Bull were extremely good at this over the last 2 years, and some of their upgrades are bound to be recreated by the other teams. But which ones will they take? Let's dive into the best upgrades Red Bull made this season, which can get copied by the competition coming into 2024. The team explicitly highlighted the location of the front axle as one of the important upgrades, since it affects not only the operation of the suspension and the aerodynamics, but also tyre performance. The RB19's front axle line is somewhat ahead of its predecessor, changing not just how the front wing affects the weight created by the front wheel assemblies, but also the distance that weight travels before it hits critical surfaces like the floor and side pods. You'll also notice the angle of the RB19's upper wishbone, a design feature that many have attributed solely to the anti-dive feature, which will help stabilize the car's platform and is unquestionably important with this generation of F1 cars. However, the aerodynamic implications of the suspension fairings must also be considered, with every team on the grid seeking for methods to best use them while maintaining kinematic performance. The sidewalls of the RB18's chassis were already tapered to aid airflow passage beneath the chassis, but the team decided to further decrease the cross-section in the bottom half of the chassis for 2023. In comparison, the RB19's chassis has a more V-shaped profile, with the bottom of the nose obviously redesigned to cope with this. Now onto something that is perhaps one of the most important parts of the current regulations, the side pods. The side pods are one of the most talked about parts of this generation of cars, primarily because they are a highly visible component that makes it easier to distinguish one design concept from another. Red Bull, Alpine and AlphaTauri adopted the downwash ramp-style approach from the start, whilst Ferrari and Mercedes chose totally different designs. While the entire grid has settled on an arrangement similar to those initially seen on the aforementioned 3, there has also been a shift towards another characteristic, first presented by Alpine, that features deep gullies and water slides side pod bodywork layout. However, Red Bull has yet to fall to it. The RB18's side pods did have a distinctive inlet layout, which more teams are beginning to be persuaded by. The lower lip of the side pod's bodywork, which forms the inlet, is significantly further forward than the higher lip, improving the aspect ratio of the inlet while also providing protection from the wind channeled through the undercut. While others focused on the aforementioned bodywork changes, Red Bull concentrated on enhancements that could be made to the design of its intake to help unlock even more performance, both aerodynamically and from a cooling standpoint. The first of these changes occurred during the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, when the lower lip was lifted and the bodywork was enlarged to retain the aspect ratio of the intake. It's a design decision that was carried to new heights during the Hungarian Grand Prix, when the team elevated the bottom lip and enlarged the side pod bodywork once more. This was done not just to keep the aspect ratio of the intake the same, but also to increase the side pod's aerodynamic output in respect to the wake formed by the front wheel assembly and how airflow migrates around the side pod to the rear of the car. The most intriguing part of Red Bull's alterations is how it used the testing rules to its advantage, considering its limited CFD and wind tunnel skills in comparison to the rest of the field. To put this in context, Red Bull had just 70% of the coefficient at its disposal due to their 2022 finishing place, and its 2021 spending cap breach resulted in a further 10% decrease. However, Red Bull took advantage of the rules in this case, as the rules allow teams to conduct an unlimited amount of wind tunnel testing on the development of power unit heat exchangers that reject heat to air, as long as no direct or indirect measurements of aerodynamic force are taken during the test. This allowed it to focus more intensively on improving the efficiency of its heat exchangers without reducing its allocation, and then use the benefits to boost the aerodynamic output of the bodywork. The team didn't simply change the side pods as part of the Hungarian Grand Prix upgrade. The engine cover architecture was also changed, with a focus on changing the form of the outlet to produce a more downward-looking nozzle. Additionally, the shark fin and top outlet were changed, with the shark fin being extended and the outlet being shortened. Next up, the floor. The floor of this generation of cars is without a doubt the most crucial design criterion, and it is sometimes cloaked in mystery due to our inability to obtain visual confirmation of its appearance at will. Instead, We must wait for cars to fail or crash out so that they may be hauled away from the track by crane so that we can see beneath. Monaco was obviously significant in this regard in 2023, as we were exposed to photographs of not just the RB19, but also its closest competitors at the time, Mercedes and Ferrari. The design of the RB18 and RB19 is one of progression, albeit there is a notable difference in the approach chosen at the floor's edge, as the designers were compelled to adjust for modifications made to the laws in this location. Red Bull led the drive on the ice skate alternative, which became popular in 2022, but regulatory adjustments to increase the floor's edge appear to have lessened the feature's efficacy, prompting everyone to reconsider. Red Bull chose a more traditional edge wing design, using part of the area that had previously been shaved away on the RB18. And, during the Hungarian Grand Prix, we observed a set of strakes introduced to the underside of the edge wing to aid enhance flow conditions. It's a design element we've previously seen deployed by Mercedes, as both cars were elevated far over the track in Monaco a few months ago. Many people anticipated that information transfer from the RB19 to other teams would be the most successful in this circumstance. However, Red Bull utilized it as a method to study aspects that were functioning elsewhere and adapt them to their machine, as they always do. Throughout the season, the twisted section of the edge wing has undergone various revisions, resulting in another modest change in profile and the inclusion of another vane to aid with flow distribution as part of the Singapore upgrade. The team initially postponed the change at that race, instead returning to a well-known specification to assist in getting the vehicle set up for a track that it was having trouble with. The floor reappeared in Suzuka, however, and remained on the car for the remainder of the season. While the underfloor is certainly the key to unlocking performance for this new generation of cars, we must also keep in mind that excellent design decisions made here are for nothing if the diffuser section does not take advantage of them. In Red Bull's example, it changed its design pretty early in the season after taking inspiration from one of its competitors. This should come as no surprise, since teams continually analyze the designs seen up and down the grid in search of small pockets of performance that they have yet to study. In this case, however, it's a design element stolen by a front-running team from one at the bottom of the grid, with inspiration originating from Williams. The RB19 debuted the design solution in issue at the Spanish Grand Prix, with the top corner of the diffuser squeezed inward. This has an effect on the airflow and pressure distribution both inside and outside the diffuser as it flows into that corner. Thus, the team had to determine the proper geometries not just for the pinched part, but also for the diffuser's walls and the ramping ceiling. Under the old regulations, Red Bull was known for spending significant efforts on both front and rear wing designs, not just to increase overall performance but also to account for the varying downforce levels necessary throughout the course of a season. And, although the latter is still a priority, the team hasn't seen the need to make big idea modifications here in 2023. Meanwhile, at the back of the car, Red Bull followed practically the whole grid in Singapore by introducing its own version of the open-ended rear wing end plate arrangement. In this design domain, two major groupings have arisen, with Red Bull following in the footsteps of Alpine, AlphaTauri and McLaren, all of whom had been racing a variation of their own for some time. The use of this open-ended design configuration, regardless of variant, is fundamentally a means of disrupting the original intent of the new regulations, which sought to better control the vortex formed at the wing's tip by removing the forward section of the end plate entirely and merging it with the flaps. Creating discontinuity in this region not only affects the design of the tip section, but it also modifies the rear cutout and gives designers with a new set of parameters for the wing's drag and downforce. In Red Bull's case, the open-ended design with greater downforce configurations was chosen to decrease drag. This brings us to the team's attitude to lower downforce setups, which Red Bull has tended to focus less on this season. It was instead concentrating its efforts on balancing downforce and drag levels by rearranging its beam wing layout. This frequently resulted in the use of a single, lower piece, while a rear wing more commensurate with a greater downforce layout was fitted. Red Bull's last season update arrived at the Mexican Grand Prix, although it was merely a new cooling outlet panel for the engine cover to assist cope with the temperatures the car was subjected to at altitude. As a result, the RB19's last substantial modifications occurred at the Singapore Grand Prix, with livery refreshes at the US and Las Vegas Grand Prix being the only further alterations made to the car in the final 5 rounds of the championship. And while the rest of the grid will be seeking to reduce the gap to Red Bull in 2024, the RB20 is unlikely to be too adventurous. Instead, like Red Bull has done in the past, it will be about refining and chipping away at the underlying performance that may be acquired throughout this regulated age. But the bigger question will be, who will try to replicate Red Bull's parts next season? And will they be successful doing it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below.